Okay, welcome back to our second session of TMF Maturity Day. I see some familiar faces. Obviously, a big investment for everybody taking a little bit of time out of their workday. Huge kudos to those, your bosses for allowing you to do this. We'll let everybody fold in. Wow, there's already a lot of people for this one. Amazing. We're already over 100. That's great. All right, perfect. We'll give everybody maybe a few minutes to fold in. While we're doing that, I have two questions for you. The first question is, where are you guys dialing in from in the world today watching this session? And then the second one is, what's going to be your Halloween costume? I want to know what your Halloween costume is going to be, because I'm looking for ideas. So what's everyone's Halloween costume this year? We got it coming up next week. I need some ideas, guys. Right, we'll let everybody fold in. Okay, we've got some funny ideas here. A plague doctor. I love that. And no costume. Come on, Audrey, you can do it. You can think of something. No Halloween in Germany. You guys are missing out. We've got Carla dressing up as a piece of pizza. Good idea. All right, perfect. We've got Matt from Montreal, who is Pepper, and his girlfriend is Salt. I like that. A little bit of a food theme there. Aviv is going to be dressing up as an inspection-ready TMF. What does that look like, Aviv? That's what I want to know. What does an inspection-ready TMF look like in a costume? Very scary. All right, and then Anna Meta is dressing up as a scary document. All documents are scary, Anna Meta. All documents. All right, perfect. I think we probably have most of everyone. If everyone can jump in that are joining right now, let us know where you're joining us in from. And if you have a Halloween outfit that you guys are dressing up as this year. Maybe what we can do is get started with the presentation, and then those that are joining us a little later can jump in. So I'll kick things off just by giving a bit of an introduction. For those of you that were on the session before, you would have heard some of this. Oh, Donatella, I don't. Yeah, perfect. I'll let you share your slide. So obviously TMF Maturity Day is designed specifically to improve the maturity of your team, to give you an introduction into how to define your TMF maturity model. Donatella, just a note that we don't see the correct screen. We'll let you get there. And so the last session we covered what is a TMF maturity model. So we looked at how that would work from a practical perspective in implementing a TMF maturity model, and how to evaluate where you might be in that level. But now we're going to focus on how to improve or implement a TMF process from scratch. Donatella, were you able to figure out the screen?
You can see the screen?
We just see the slide view, not the presenter view.
Oh.
Wouldn't be an online event, team, if we didn't have some technical issues.
So I try to stop to share and share again. Okay.
Perfect. That just gives everybody a little bit more time to jump in. A lot of people with no costumes. Come on, guys, you got to get into the spirit of things. I know that those that are maybe outside of North America, Halloween isn't widely supported. So maybe that's something you guys can kick off. All right. Just as a reminder to everybody, perfect. Just as a reminder to everybody, we want these sessions to be as interactive as possible. So please, there is a Q&A tab. If you have questions based on any of the content that we present today, please throw in your questions into the Q&A tab. There's also a chat, so you can interact with the audience. You can interact with us. We'll be monitoring that. So please use those features of Zoom. And of course, there's a number of polls throughout today's session. So that's something that we'll also get up on the screen when the time is right. So let's just jump into a quick summary of the day, just to remind everybody of what we have in front of us. So we just completed about 10 minutes ago a session on how to identify your organization's TMF maturity and how to plan for growth. We're going to focus now on building a TMF management process from start to finish. We're then going to move in after a short 15-minute break. One of the most exciting sessions that we've ever put together, which is a trial master file AMA, or Ask Me Anything, where the audience is able and the community is able to jump onto that line and ask our panel of experts any TMF related question that you can think of. You can see if you can throw as many difficult ones as possible and see if we have the answers. And then the last session of the day is obviously focusing on metrics. So we'll tackle that at about 1 p.m. Eastern. Housekeeping sessions are 45 minutes. So it'll give you a bit of a 15-minute break to respond to emails and, maybe have a quick bio break before the next session. All sessions are recorded. I'm super happy to note that the last session we did, nobody asked if the session was recorded. So that just means everybody was listening. So all of those recordings will be made available after the event. And then again, I'll reiterate, please ask your questions in the question tab. There's a little Q&A icon, 2 little speech bubbles. You can head there to ask your questions. So just wanted to highlight a little bit on TMF maturity and why we're doing TMF Maturity Day. Most recently, a couple of months ago, Montreal actually launched and released a completely new arm of our business, really focused on TMF consulting, strategic consulting, and TMF related support. And alongside those new services, we also launched a completely new educational offering called TMF Maturity Training, which essentially allows you to go through the theoretical based training that you need to be able to get the foundations of these principles and concepts, but pairing those with practical skill building workshops and templates and deliverables to help you guys catalyze that knowledge and improve the maturity of your TMF process internally. We have 3 levels. So maybe if we go to the next slide, which cover a number of different subjects. So in essentials, we have TMF principles in GCP, TMF index and reference model, the eTMF plan, and so on and so forth. I won't go through all of them. Intermediate tackles slightly more intermediate subjects. So we'll tackle things like oversight and TMF quality control and all of those really great subjects. And then in the advanced level, we have things like TMF risk-based approach, inspection readiness, quality by design, and so on. So really, really comprehensive training and workshop-based packages. Again, this is not just a theoretical-based training program. This is a training program with really, really comprehensive education paired with those practical skill building workshops delivered to your entire team. So it's not one individual going away and getting training. It's engaging your entire stakeholder group to improve TMF processes holistically. So let's jump into the session. So building a TMF management process from start to finish. Again, it's going to be about 30 minutes, and then we'll try and leave about 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. So let's jump into the speakers for today. So for those of you that were on the last session, you would have heard Donatella speak already. However, we also have a new guest who's joining us today, who's also part of the eTMF services team at Montreal, in Lindsay Kerwan. So both Donatella and Lindsay are going to be taking us through today's session on how to implement a TMF process from start to finish. So what we'll cover is key elements for building a TMF management process, how to set TMF management goals, how to assess and identify gaps in your current process. So gaps are going to be a big focus for TMF Maturity Day, how to identify stakeholders, and then how to implement or update SOPs and work instructions that guide and control and govern that TMF management process. In terms of the objectives, what we want you to leave with today, what you'll achieve after attending today's session, is knowing how to put in place a system, know that putting in place a system doesn't automatically improve your TMF process, and that you need to put in place a fundamental process at the core level to be able to improve the way that TMF management operates. And with that, I will hand it over to Donatella and Lindsay.
Thank you, Oliver, for the great presentation introduction. And let's move on to the content of this session. So you have acquired an eTMF software. And now what happened? I wanted to make you understand with this picture of an iceberg that buying an eTMF, buying a software for managing your trial master file is not the end of the journey. It's not the end, the final goal to achieve inspection readiness. It's just the beginning. It's just the beginning of a very challenging journey to improve your quality and to improve your compliance to be inspection ready. Because consider the top of the iceberg, like, okay, I've got my eTMF software, so I've got more oversight, more control of my eTMF, but under the top, there's a lot of things to be implementing, to be developed, to be inspection ready. Processes, training, metrics and KPI. So there are a lot of aspects to be considered, and buying the software is just the bottom. So let's have a look to this inspection finding took by the MHRA GCP inspection metric report. So the quality check performed on eTMF document is not risk-based criteria, nor includes the review of the audit trail. This finding is not a software finding. It's not related to the eTMF system. It's related to the process. So the finding itself is focusing on the process of TMF management and not on the system. The inspector come and they will check, yes, obviously, if the system is a validated one and if it is, it has all the functionality that are necessary, but the real check will be done on your process. They want the evidence of your oversight. If you're a sponsor that maybe outsource the TMF to a CRO, they want to see the evidence of your quality check inside your TMF. So to buy the right or the most incredible software in the world for TMF management is just the beginning of a really big journey for inspection readiness. It's not the end. So the goal is to be inspection ready. When we acquire the eTMF, we do that to have more control, more oversight. So try to be more inspection ready in our processes for TMF. And what are the expectations of competent authority towards the TMF management process? Here there's a list, which obviously is not exhaustive, but it's just to give you an idea of the requirement. TMF shall be complete. Content of the TMF shall be readily available and accessible to inspector. Alteration of content must be traceable. Clear accountabilities. Sponsors must appoint individuals in the organization that are responsible for the TMF archive. Staff is trained on TMF processes. Formal processes for QC on TMF content. And the list can go on. But this is just to give an idea that these requirements are process requirements. These are not related to the software. These are process requirement for your TMF management. So it's really, really important not thinking that having an eTMF is the end of your improvement in terms of quality and inspection readiness. So say that, obviously you need to consider the technology, but also the process, and last but not least, the people, if you want to increase your inspection readiness. So these three elements combined together in the proper way with the right strategy can really be the key to success in your inspection readiness status. So focus on processes, people, and technology. And to start to be inspection readiness, apart from the eTMF, let's start with the process. The process is really, really important because, as seen before, the inspector will come and they will check your process for doing quality check, for audit trail review, for keep the security and the data integrity of your TMF. So they will check your process and they will verify your compliance with the requirement. So how can I set up the proper process? First of all, conduct a gap as is analysis. So you have to understand, as we discussed with the maturity level, what is your level? What are you currently doing for your TMF? And define each step of the process, each activities that you have put in place to gain inspection readiness. So very helpful, I think, in this step of the development of the process is to do and to develop a flowchart to understand the different steps of the process, to verify if there is any duplicates of this process. So to delete if there is a repetition in the process, or to see if there is any gap in the process. Think about the QC, the process of QC. Once uploaded, obviously, you have to perform the document, you have to perform a quality check. The outcome can be, yes, it is fine, good documentation plus in compliance, no, there is an issue. based on these two, let's say, options, you will have other action, other following action as a result of the outcome of the QC. So define the step and the order of the step of the process to better have the idea of what has to be done for your TMF management. And based on that, determine the status of your inspection readiness, because again, maybe you have covered all the steps of a good process for TMF management, or maybe you have forgotten to implement some work instruction or some activities for some aspect in the TMF. So develop the flow chart to understand how the process it is now and identify what is it has to be deleted and what it is missing in your current process. Do that to maximize the efficiency of the business process, because again, doing that will really help you to focus the strategy, the resources, and prioritize the action that you have to implement in making more efficient your process for TMF management. Say that one useful tips is to do an internal SOP mapping. So the SOP regarding the TMF management is not is strictly linked to all the other SOP for the clinical trial management. If you have a look to the clinical trial process, you realize that majority of the time, the outcome of a process of the clinical trial management is a document. Let's think about the monitoring visit. You have the monitoring visit, which is a very important step during clinical trial. And around, let's say, these activities, you've got a confirmation letter. You've got, well, first of all, the monitoring plan, but you've got the monitoring, the confirmation letter of the monitoring visit report, and the follow-up letter of the monitoring visit or the monitoring visit. So you've got different documents that are an outcome of a clinical trial process. They are pieces of the story of your clinical trial. So they are very fundamental pieces of your TMF to tell a good story in case of inspection. So to have the ability and to have the opportunity to develop these references internal to your company is very, very important to understand where the pieces of my story will come from, where the department, so who is responsible for that SOP, for that outcome, clinical operations, statistician, pharmacovigilance. So do an SOP mapping inside of organization, keep it updated, obviously, because SOP can change, processes can change, and use this to engage other stakeholders, because again, not all the clinical trial processes are just for the clinical development. There is the pharmacovigilance, for example, or the data management that produce documents that are relevant for the TMF. So they need to be engaged and to understand what are the SOP that have an impact on the story of the TMF is really crucial and important. When you are developing the process for your TMF, another thing to consider is the life cycle of the trial master file. So we can say in clinical trial that the clinical trial, the main stages of clinical trial are the startup, conduct, closure, and the same happen to TMF. For TMF life cycle, we've got the startup activities, the contact, and the closure. When you are starting the clinical trial, you develop the TMF plan, the TMF index, you set up all the user in the system if you've got an eTMF. So you are really preparing to use the software or anyway the process for your TMF. And then there is the conduction. So the clinical trial starts, and so the TMF starts to collect and starts the management of the document of the clinical trial to tell the story. And when the clinical trial will end, there is the closure. So in theory, the story, everything has been collected, the story is there. So I need to verify if everything is complete, timeliness was in compliance, quality is ensured. So you do all the activities to close and to archive for long-term retention your TMF. So in the process, consider when you develop the TMF process, also the life cycle of the TMF, because according to the stage of your life cycle, of the TMF life cycle, there are different activities to be taken into consideration. So Very important, as discussed before, to identify all the pieces of the TMF puzzle. The TMF management process is a very great and complex process. If you start to analyze it, you will understand there are lots of aspects to be taken into consideration that makes your TMF a good story. So it's important when you start to improve or to develop your current process to find the answer to this question. Give just some example. Where is my TMF content located? It's not mandatory to have just one location for the TMF related content. Obviously, it's more, it's easy if everything is just in one place. But in case you've got other validated system, or for any reason you've got even some paper archive for TMF, some TMF document, just be aware where they are located. So I have to know where the pieces of my story are, and based on that, obviously, I will develop the process. Which SOP is relevant? So you will have an SOP about TMF management, obviously, maybe even more than one, considering the complexity of the process. But then all the other SOP related to the clinical trial management have an impact on my process for TMF management. So I need to consider those SOP as well. Who is the owner of the TMF document? So who is going to produce this document? Clinical, CRO, the site. So who is the owner? Where does this document come from? Because that will be important in terms of accountability and responsibility for TMF management. So lots of questions that you have to answer to identify the pieces of your process to be obviously more inspection readiness and in compliance with the requirement. So say that, I want to hear your comment. Do you have established and shared TMF process management goals in your company? No? Yes, but I can't remember the list of goals. Yes, but the goals are not shared outside clinical development. Yes, and everyone in the company know about them.
I love this question. This is going to help us understand where people's heads are at when it comes to the impact of TMF, obviously beyond the clinical development group, and engaging those non-TMF stakeholders with TMF focused goals. So we'll give everybody a few seconds to participate in the poll. Almost half of you have responded. So if you haven't had a chance yet, you should see it on your screen. But if you don't, head over to the little polls section in your menu and you'll be able to see the poll. Got some interesting results so far. It's a bit of a mixed response, which is cool. We'll give everybody 10 more seconds. All right, I'm going to close the poll in 3, 2, 1 and share the results. Very interesting, Donatella.
Yes, very, very interesting. Absolutely. I think that it confirms that outside there, the TMF world is very heterogeneous. I mean, each situation, each company has its own reality in terms of TMF management. And this is why you have to analyze and define your own strategy for TMF process, because we're not at the same level. So very, very interesting. Yeah.
And Donatella, maybe a question for this that maybe some people on the line are asking themselves: why do we think today that maybe 28% of the respondents said that the goals are not shared outside of clinical development? Why do we think that maybe some of those folks don't feel like they can share those goals outside of their team?
Oh, well, Oliver, I think I can go back to my previous answer in terms of engage a stakeholder and all the stuff. Basically, because for history, I would say, TMF has always been something that just the clinical development will take care, has always been seen and considered as something that is a deliverable of the clinical operation, but not of all the other functions. And again, is a lack of knowledge, is a lack of understanding the requirement of TMF, and it's really a matter of keep people informed, keep people update and interested in TMF, not because we love TMF, but because it's a requirement, because it can be a great impact on the business of the company itself. You can have a delay in the marketing authorization, you can have something even in the worst case scenario rejected. So it has a big impact, and majority of the people, maybe even for lack of experience in terms of inspection. I remember that in my previous work, I had the opportunity to discuss with the head of clinical operation, and she had never had inspection before. And when the inspector came, she was like, "Oh yes, I'm prepared on the protocol." And I said, the inspector will not ask anything about the protocol. Maybe he will want to see the version of the data, if they are collecting the TMF, but they are not going to ask you the content of the protocol. That is, affair of the competent authority and the committee. When the inspector comes, they will check the TMF. And so, it's really a change in your perspective on what an inspector can ask you and what are the requirements. And if you don't understand that TMF is a requirement, the goal of TMF to be inspection ready will never be in your list. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's, to synthesize what you said, and I think it's really about, first of all, identifying and understanding that you need to engage outside stakeholders within your organization to highlight the need and importance of really getting a good handle on TMF, but then also exposing the risks and benefits to making sure that these things are in place and getting them to buy into those objectives, because ultimately, like you said, they do have an impact on, they could have a pretty critical impact on your program or your overall development process. So love that question. I'll hand it back to you to kick off the rest of the presentation.
Thank you. So move on. When you're developing a process, even if it sounds weird, you have to start from the end. So start to identify your needs. Create a specific objective based of the goals you determined. List the activities that are necessary to be performed to achieve those objectives, and determine your maturity level, because as we saw before, it's very important to understand the level of experience, the level of knowledge to define the right strategy for TMF development management, because otherwise you will focus on things that maybe are not a priority, you will focus on things that are not a gaps. So very important to understand where you're starting from to define the right pathway and strategy to move on. And obviously, to set up the TMF management goals, it's very important to identify the key parameters that have an impact on TMF inspection readiness and its risk. So let's think about, for example, the time to collect the final document and upload them in a system, in an eTMF, or the time to solve a quality issue after a quality check. Does this key parameter have an impact of the inspection readiness of my TMF? Yes, they have. They've got a big impact. So once identify those key parameters, and once identify the data, the outcome of those parameters, let's monitor them on a regular basis, because I have to identify if my corrective and maybe even preventive action has made the difference, has improved the process, and don't represent those key parameters for me an issue anymore in my TMF management. I think that we all agree that the TMF key parameters in terms of TMF inspection readiness are quality, timeliness, and completeness. We all know that these are a requirement. Everything must be in the TMF to tell the good story, so the completeness, the timeliness, so I have to fill my TMF on a regular basis and not just the day before the inspection. And quality, I have to upload, in case of eTMF, a good document that follow good documentation practice. So these are the main three areas, categories, if you want to call them, to ensure the inspection readiness of my TMF. But don't stop to these three main areas. For each of these areas, let's say, you can go more granularly, you can go more detailed, and get more data for your TMF and so for the your TMF process management. Let's think, for example, to quality. Quality is the macro area, the big area, the category from in terms of key TMF parameter. I can check the percentage, the number of documents with quality issue, and that is already more granular and detailed information about the quality. Above that, inside of that, I can also define just which document have been misfilled. So define a category of quality issue, I can verify which is the percentage of just a specific category of quality issue. So be granular, be detailed, and define, let's say, this issue inside your TMF management based on the macro category, which is quality, completeness, and timeliness. So it will be very important to identify the critical success factor, the key performance questions, and the key performance indicators. These three elements combined together can really help you to manage the parameters of quality, timeliness, and completeness to ensure the inspection readiness of your TMF. And just to give you a more practical example, I would say, let's start from the documentation field in the TMF must follow a good documentation practice. It is a success factor, because if my documents are not good, are not following good documentation practice, I will have lots of quality issue, finding, inspection findings. So this is a successful factor. The question is, obviously, do the documents in my TMF meet all the applicable quality standards? Yes or no? The KPI that tells me how the situation is in my TMF is the percentage of assessed documents that meet quality standard. If this percent is okay, it means that my process is fine, so I'm doing properly and in compliance with the requirement, my TMF management. If I start to see that this percentage is very high, it means that there's something wrong in the process that I need to review and implement mitigation or corrective action in the short term, and some preventive action in the longer term to improve this finding in terms of quality. So consider that. I'd like to hear your voice about how often do you hear TMF feeling is not my job in your organization? Never? From a few colleagues of the department, from several colleagues of the department, from all over the organization. Obviously, TMF feeling is not my job. It can be TMF quality check is not my job. TMF collecting is not my job. So let's see what's your situation.
All right, we'll give everybody a few seconds. We are running a little behind on time, so this will be our last poll for today. We'll skip any other polls just so that we can make sure we have some time for questions at the end. We'll give everybody about 10 seconds to respond. Okay, lots of really good participation on this poll. Not surprised. And I'm going to close the poll in 3, 2, 1. And we'll share the results. So 27% said never. So that's a luxury. Amazing.
Yeah,
You've never heard that
definitely.
in your organization. The 22% said from several colleagues or departments. 14% said from all over the organization. And 38% from a few colleagues or departments. So really interesting results there. Obviously, the vast majority of you are still getting the "that's not my job" response. And hopefully we can, as we go through the rest of this presentation, kind of help you understand how you can engage those additional stakeholders to jump into those things and help them understand that maybe it is part of their job.
Yes, exactly. In fact, now I leave the floor to Lindsay, because we have covered the relevance of the process in the inspection readiness. We know the relevance of the system, but now we need to define the relevance of people. And say that, I leave the floor to Lindsay.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Donatella. So as we're thinking about how to build our TMF management process from those 3 different dimensions of content, process, and systems, it's going to be helpful for us to identify if there are any gaps in the current process, and that will help us then to improve it. So you're going to start by a detailed KPI and gap analysis, which will not only help you to determine what the next steps will be, but it will also help you to plan that change management effort when you're putting that new TMF process in place. So as part of your gap analysis, you can identify the location of all the TMF documentation. So in file share, in paper, in TMF systems, or even in other clinical systems or departments. You'll also need to identify any impacted SOPs or processes, so from your TMF management SOPs, other clinical SOPs and worker instructions, as you'll be refining those SOPs and having the stakeholders also trained on them. Lastly, then you'll identify the impacted stakeholders, so maybe the document owners or even other users that have performed different activities. You'll need to engage these stakeholders as you start that change management process and effort, so that they will be the ones carrying out that new process once everything is in place. So your TMF stakeholders, these are not just the document owners, they're also the other users that might be contributing to the TMF even outside of the clinical operations team. So you'll be identifying those key users, the super users, even if they're in different departments like pharmacovigilance, statistics, or even data management. Each functional area is responsible for their own documentation, right? So you'll need to engage these stakeholders in training on the new process and also initiation of a super user network. Now, training is really the foundation for engaging each of the TMF stakeholders. Everyone can read an SOP, right? Or at least they're supposed to. But what we found is that if you really want to engage each of the stakeholders, they really need to understand the importance and the requirements of the TMF in the first place. So many of you had said that you had heard maybe one or a few colleagues say that TMF filing is not my job, and that's true, that it might not be their primary role, but they are responsible for the documents that they're creating or even reviewing or approving. So they do have a responsibility to understand what the GCP requirements are surrounding the TMF. So laying a foundational knowledge across all of the TMF stakeholders on, the essential topics like TMF plan, TMF index, and what document QC is, even the GCP principles as well that are surrounding the TMF. These are what we believe to be the prerequisite for level setting the team and your organization so that everyone is working towards the same goals. Those goals are to improve your quality, timeliness, and completeness of your TMF. So if during your analysis you find that your different stakeholders, actually they already have a good level, that's amazing. You can push it further. Maybe there's some other gaps, and maybe they need to be trained on TMF quality control or data integrity, or maybe inspection readiness or risk-based approach is what you're aiming for. And the message here is whatever your maturity level is across your team, try to choose the different topics that will bring the different stakeholders together and closer to your goals for improving your process. So once you've identified the stakeholders and you have a baseline knowledge of the TMF best practices, all of the stakeholders then need to engage in that change management and culture activities, right? So communicate with each of the stakeholders. Remember, there's going to be different departments, different people working on the TMF. So each one of them is going to have some different needs surrounding the TMF. So try to align on the different expectations and ensure that you're all working towards the same goals. That goal should be TMF inspection readiness, and then working on creating some visibility around the TMF. And that may include like presenting metrics and communicating if there's any gaps that were found, and showing and sharing with each one of the departments so that they can really understand where the TMF is. And is that. So integrate your TMF management into the day-to-day clinical processes. Everything that is done in your trial, every decision that is made or change that happens should actually be a document in the TMF. People often forget this, that you need to link the clinical process with filing documents in the TMF. And if you're not filing your documents in the TMF, you're going to have completeness issues. So try to use those metrics to expose any of those deficiencies so that you can ensure then that you have, you're working on those TMF requirements in all of your clinical SOPs. I think we're going to skip this poll just because we're running a little bit out of time. So we'll move on to the next slide. And the question in the last poll would have been, does the process come before the technology? And the answer would be that, well, you need to have your process in place first before you start using an eTMF system. So you want to be, of course, compliant with all of the regulations. So it also means that you'll have the process in place, but the users also need to be trained on that process as well. So once you have your governing SOPs in place, your work instructions, your TMF plan rules, and then everybody is trained on it, then you can start working in your eTMF in a compliant manner. Now, when you plan on implementing an eTMF system, working with some TMF templates can really help you speed along that process and help you hit the ground running faster. So if you don't have a very large team, or maybe you don't have a QA department, or maybe you've never created a process before and you don't know what to do, there are some templates that are available from my team that we've listed here on the slide. We've developed these templates to help support our customers to faster implement an eTMF and go through that study startup phase a little bit quicker. SOPs on TMF management, work instruction on clinical trial setup and system administration, also work instruction on the document lifecycle management, eTMF business rules, right, to make sure that everybody is working consistently across the TMF, and also an eTMF plan template if you're working on more than one trial. This is really handy to have that template in place as well. So the take-home message here is that these templates are necessary. The process is necessary, right, for implementing your eTMF. Process is actually mandatory, and it's also mandatory to have all of your stakeholders trained on these processes as well. But don't panic if you don't have these in place already. You can reach out to our team if this is something that you'd like to get set up. We can certainly help you with that. So I believe this is the last slide of today's session. So I'll leave the floor back to Oliver to get that question and answer session going. Thank you, everyone.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that really great explanation, both Donatella and Lindsay. We're going to jump into a few questions. I'm going to throw those questions at you, Donatella. So let's just make sure you're up on the screen. Perfect. So first question, what would one that doesn't know anything about TMF learn from a fundamental perspective needed to be successful in TMF? So are there any maybe things that you would suggest people cover first if they don't know anything about TMF?
Well, first of all, we had this, let's say, situation just a couple of months ago, and start from the basic, start from the real necessary requirement from a GCP perspective, because everything starts from there. So definitely you need to understand what is a trial master file, so a collection of documents and blah, blah, blah. What are the requirements, so why it is important, and then just give some, let's say, general suggestion in terms of TMF. What is a TMF plan? What is a TMF reference model, which is not mandatory, but we all strongly recommend to have it in place. So definitely, let's start from a high level perspective, an overview of what trial master file is, if this person has never had experience with trial master file, and then move on, next step. But yes, basically, even the idea, the concept of our TMF maturity training action. The essential one is, I don't know nothing of TMF, but I'm starting a position, for example, as a CTA or as someone that will manage a TMF. So I need to start to increase and develop my knowledge. So let's start from the basic. So the basic topics, the basic aspect that you need to know when you are talking about TMF.
Amazing. We're going to zoom in a little bit for the next question. Someone asked, what is the difference between a TMF index and a TMF plan?
Oh, nice question. Very nice. So TMF index is basically, you can define it as the roadmap, as the table of content of your TMF. So is the list, is the inventory, I would say, of what your TMF your TMF contains. So it's really the index, basically. So it's a spreadsheet where you say, okay, I've got, this is applicable, not, it's not applicable. And it's very useful because that will support you to check the completeness and to verify if you're filling all the essential and the core document in your TMF. The TMF plan, it's another thing. Basically, it's a document, and this is why we develop a template that can be customized according to each organization profile, each organization situation, where you list not the process itself, because basically the process will be kept in SOP. So in the TMF plan, you can refer to the SOP in place if it is applicable, but you can detail more, for example, if there is an exception. You can detail aspects of the TMF process that are not covered in the TMF SOP, because otherwise it would be too long. Let's think about the situation where I've got a sponsor that delegates the CRO to manage a TMF. So there must be, let's say, an agreement. This must be, according to regulation, there must be clear detail of the agreement of the responsibility of the sponsor and of the CRO in the situation of outsourcing. Usually, by my experience, the contract with the CRO will never cover these details. There will be just the sentence TMF management outsourced to the CRO, which means nothing, because you don't understand who is responsible for collecting, who is responsible for filling, for quality check. So you need to identify all these aspects, because as already said, the TMF process is very complex. And to define this aspect and file, let's say, the agreement with the CRO, you can use the TMF plan in place. So you can decide, you can identify who are, for example, the facilitator from the CRO side, who is responsible for the study team in the sponsor side, putting name and surname of the person, what to do in case of, for example, the final reconciliation, if there are any gaps or any issue, who will be responsible to fill them, even if the clinical trial is closed. What to do with emails, how are you going to manage emails when there is a CRO managing the majority of the communication? How about not to file, trackers? So you cover lots of aspects that you need to agree with the CRO. But it can also use in case of in-house internal management of the TMF, because again, as even Lindsay said, there are lots of stakeholders internally to be engaged and develop. So make a TMF plan to make them understand the collection, for example, of the document. Is the document owner responsibility? Will make them understand, okay, this step of the process is my responsibility. So I need to be accountable and responsible for this step. Then the index maybe and the quality check will be done by another person. So, but it's important to define the receipt table in the TMF process. So the receipt table will be implemented in your TMF plan to understand in detail who is doing what. So to identify and be aligned on the expectation of TMF requirement.
Amazing. What a detailed answer. Thank you so much for that. There's been lots of other really great questions, but we've actually run out of time for today. However, I would ask for all of you that have asked questions today that we weren't able to get to hop on in about 10 minutes time to our AMA, our Ask Me Anything session, which is happening at 12 Eastern. So in about 10 minutes, you can ask those questions on that AMA, and that session, the entire session is dedicated to question and answer. So I'll close it for today. I want to thank everybody for their time. I think it's been a really amazing session with lots of really great content. I want to thank everybody for attending, as well as our speakers, and then we'll see you on the next session in about 10 minutes time. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.